Hello, peeps. It's a hillbilly halfwit. How are you all today? What we're going to talk about today is dredging rivers and Builth wells having continuous flooding and battles with the Environment Agency. So if you haven't subscribed already, please click that subscribe button below and like and share. It doesn't cost you anything and it really helps me out, okay? So let's get going. The content in this video is intended for comedic purposes only. The views expressed in this video are not to be taken as factual information or representation of my personal beliefs. I'm critically reviewing the info and videos I show as examples. Now, this is what I wanted to show you. Where this has happened lately is very close, not too far from my home, 10 or 15 miles from my home. And over the years, I'm 52-year-old. I've seen it flood several times a year, and it's getting worse and worse the last couple of decades because nobody is dredging the other side of the bridge in Builth. There was a tree with a root there for blooming 12 months. Nobody even bothered to move, and it was blocking the one side up. So let's have a look at how dredging works. If you look at that number one, if you look at the floodplain, when silt builds up on the bottom of the river, it cannot take the same amount of water. So then when this amount of water goes into the river from a flood or whatever, and it goes over the side of the banks and during heavy rain, and the river floods onto the floodplain. Now, in years gone by, because people were sensible, all over the UK, before this latest bunch of Environment Agency nutcases took charge, that was always kept dredged. So as you see in figure 3 there, diggers or vacuum pumps, it's mostly diggers, were used to remove silt and increase the river capacity. So in number 4 there now you can see there's been a flood, and because there's more of a volume of an area to take the water, it doesn't spread over the banks. So that is how it all works. It's very simple. You can pretend this doesn't happen, but it happens all the time. It's got to be a continual process of removing that shale in certain areas to stop people and their houses getting flooded. Because people, in my opinion, are supposed to be looked after by the state and the population. It's not fair in them getting flooded all the time. Absolutely shameful. So let's have a look what's happening in Builth. This is in Builth Wells. Now this was only 2 weeks ago. I think you remember that time when I showed you and the doors blew in, yeah. Now this has happened 2 or 3 times this last year, and businesses are getting flooded out continually. It's an absolute, of course this would still happen, but the bottom side of the bridge in Builth Wells needs clearing. Everybody knows it, but nobody will do anything because they think nature is worth more than people's lives. Now this needs sorting out. And I totally accept people don't think this is right in certain occasions, but when it's happening consistently now, where it never used to happen all the time, there is a problem. Environment Agency are a bunch of useless tossers, in my opinion. So let's see what's happened. A government body has responded after it was criticised by a Powys mayor over flooding in the wake of Storm Dara. Builth Wells Mayor Councillor Gwyn Davies told BBC Radio Wales that he did not have a high opinion of Natural Resources Wales over their river management and criticised the lack of dredging. The town suffered widespread flooding after the River Wye burst its bank in the wake of the storm earlier this month. Now NRW has responded to the comments saying they understand the concerns. Well, no, they don't understand the concerns because they're not interested in people anymore. They do not think people's lives matter anymore. Councillor Davis said we have a big problem in Builth Wells with the river, which used to be dredged and maintained better. There's 20,000 tonnes of stone and debris the bottom side of Builth Bridge, which they refuse to clear because they reckon it's not a problem. Responding to the comments, the NRW spokesman said, we understand the concerns of people who live in Llanelwedd and Builth Wells regarding flooding in the community and appreciate the frustration locally after the recent flooding following Storm Dara. But this has happened 2 or 3 times a year, every year. We've met with members of the local community to discuss flooding concerns and the potential role that dredging could play in managing flood risk in the area. NRW managers have agreed to model the river to give much better data and evidence on the beneficial of shale removal, not shoal removal. This work is dependent on having the resources in place to commission the modelling work. So they're not going to do anything. They're just going to ignore it and let people's businesses and lives be damaged all the time. Large-scale dredging is not always a solution to reduce flooding, and in many cases it would not solve the problem and can even make matters worse. Making a river deeper may seem a logical thing to do. Well, as I showed before, it is a logical thing to do because it's the thing to do to reduce flood risk. But in reality, this does not mean that it can cope with an equivalent amount of flood water. Yes, it does. Of course it does. The decision on whether to dredge it is made on a case-by-case basis, as it is often not the best solution compared with other flood risk measures. We also need to make sure that any activities to manage flood risk are technically, environmentally, and economically justified. It's the environment again. It's environment above people's lives. Now, I actually know a lot about this because when I was doing a job for somebody a few years ago, about a decade ago, I had to go into a house down there in Builth and scrub all the beams with a grinder to make them clean because they were refurbishing the house. And in that house that was being done up, it had been flooded a good few times over this last decade, and they had to have a permanent pump in the house underneath. So it was literally getting flooded twice a year. Somebody had owned that property. It was shameful, absolutely shameful. It didn't need to happen. It could easily be sorted there if they just kept where the bridge is in good order. Now, I was down in myself one Royal Welsh show, either the year or the year before, and there was a huge tree with its roots up against the bridge, blocking the one side off, actually hurting the bridge. Nobody was even bothering to move it because they think fish are more important than people's livelihoods and lives. That's how it works this time. So let's have a look at this again, how dredging works. Silt builds up on the riverbed over time. During heavy rain, river floods, goes over the side and then destroys people's houses and lives. Diggers or vacuum pumps, diggers, can be used to remove the silt and increase the river capacity. After extensive flood, river accumulates more silt as the river slows down. So you have to keep continuously doing it. That's how it always has been done. And in the Netherlands, if they didn't do it, the sea would take over. It's that simple. We got morons in charge. Now, this was a guy who had a similar situation where he lived. I'm not saying he was right or wrong. I'm just telling you. Now, this guy illegally took out his side of the bank, which he was trying to get the Environment Agency to sort it out because people were complaining to him that the river was flooding all the time, like in Builth, and flooding their houses and all their possessions in this one little area. Nobody would do anything. So he went on his own and he did it on his own to try and stop it. And he succeeded and stopped the flooding. Now we'll go through this in detail now. John Price admitted 7 charges of damaging the parts of River Lug in Herefordshire, including failing to stop pollution entering the water. On Thursday, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. That's more than a paedophile gets these days, just for doing the job that the Environment Agency should have done. He's 68-year-old, and he was fined 700,000. Now, this was during lockdown when they were busy at home doing sod all, most of them. But they had plenty of time to sort this guy out. Is he an angel? No. Should he perhaps have waited? I don't know. Nobody was listening to anything. Ecological vandalism on an industrial scale. The court heard Price believe he was trying to help a village and deal with storm damage. Price will have to pay more than 1.2 million in costs. It's destroyed this man for doing the job the Environment Agency should have been doing in the first place. Now, if you look on the left, there's a very, very clever picture the Environment Agency put it to the BBC saying how beautiful this all was. And they went downstream and they forgot to show on the left-hand side where there were 3 arches in this bridge, and the arch on the left was completely blocked in. Now, this used to be kept dredged properly, and it's overgrown. It looks beautiful there on the left, don't get me wrong, but you need to keep these areas open. The water can't get there. People's lives are and businesses are at stake, and you need to keep areas like this open. It's how life works. Fish and all that will come back as long as it's kept up to date and the right depth all the time. It's easy to keep up with it then. So after he did it, this was on the right. So this was straight after they did. They did one of these photographs. They're trying to make it look as bad as possible there, see? So obviously he's cut the trees off and he's dredged his side of the river, which is the left-hand side. He's opened up the bridge properly. You might think this is a bad thing, but you'll see what I mean now. So this was right after dredging, and he's had a photograph because they were after him. So his ground was on the right there. I actually know people who lived by here, and they said he'd done a good job. Obviously, some anglers might not like it, but it needs to be kept up with. And he was going to plant trees there anyway, back a bit further from the river. So that's how big it used to be. Now, if you look on here, look at the bridge where I put that red arrow. He actually opened it up so the bridge was taking the 3 gaps in the bridge were open, if you can see. So the first photo, they blocked off that whole, the hole on the left-hand side of that bridge was completely blocked off with silt, and it was only taking 2 holes worth of on the right of water, and this was a third of the size. So if you look on the left-hand side, all them houses were getting flooded every year, 2 or 3 times a year. And they were at him to try and get it sorted. And in the end, he tried to get permission. Nobody would do anything. And he went and did it on the worst of them. And he ended up getting 12 months in prison and huge fines for doing it. More than a paedophile would get for just doing the job the Environment Agency should have done themselves. Here you can see what I was on about, where that red arrow is. That was full of debris and was not being used on the left-hand side. So he's opened it up properly. I suppose technically he's done something wrong there, but the Environment Agency should have been keeping this bridge open so the bridge could take the water properly and people's houses and livelihoods are not being destroyed 2 or 3 times a year. The trouble with these people in charge of the Environmental Agency, now they think silt doesn't build up, and it builds up and up and up because nobody does anything. It gets to stupid levels. Stupid levels. They won't keep this the same now. They'll leave this cloud back in and it'll be flooding again, you watch. So this is what it's like now, after you saw all them really bad pictures. So after 12 months, that on the right there has started to return to itself. Now he was going to plant trees on the right-hand side again, further back, and just they need to keep up with it now. That's all they need. It hasn't flooded since, from what I gather, and I know people who live down there. You know, you in the end, in the countryside, you need to listen to the people who live in that area. Elderly people, this guy has been there for years and years, decades and decades. He knows what it was like. Residents know if it's going to flood or why or whatever. And for fishermen, it's a lot better for fly fishermen there. They won't get their lines caught. And there we are. But I just had to put this one up because it's quite close to me, and it's really saddening to see all these businesses and houses having to. I dare say they can't get insurance or nothing now. 2 or 3 times a year this is happening, and it never used to. And you can say it's more rain. It isn't. What happens up here is when you have a deluge of rain, they say planting trees in what's called a solvent. It won't, because when you've got a full sponge full of water, we have rain here for days and days and days and days on end. It fills up like a sponge, and then the sponge can't take any more in, and it just goes down the river. That's what it's like. People do not understand this thing. They're living in a dream world where a mole or a rat is more important than somebody's life these days, and it needs to stop. We're not in the EU anymore. We shouldn't be listening to these people. They're making a fortune. It's a civil service quango making a fortune doing nothing again. So I just thought I'd put this one up because it was local to me and I think it needs to be talked about. Builth needs to have that river dredged on the bottom side of the bridge, and that is a fact. And it's sad that it hasn't happened. Please do something about it. So please subscribe down there. I've got lots of friends who live down in the Builth area, and it really is shameful to see some of them having this problem all the time, especially when they spend so much money on the show ground. They don't seem to spend it anywhere else on the people living in actual Builth itself. So please subscribe. All the best, Gaz.